And as we continue, it's time for Media Mash, our weekly roundup of all the ways the Obama mania media try to, well, put their liberal spin on the news. And here to go through this week's material, president of the Media Research Center, the one and only Brent Bozell. By the way, all right, I'm sure you know the answer. Who are the two journalists that have been advising the president on Middle East policy?
It's a great story. Fareed Zakaria of CNN and Tom Friedman of the New York Times. Zakaria. Yeah, there's a household name, by the way. Two men who are supposed to be dispassionate observers of the political scene. One man who's an anchor of a news show, who, by the way, endorsed Obama in 2008. But here's a man who, on CNN especially, who, according to the New York Times, has been called on by the president for advice and wisdom on Egypt. And then today, when the president reports on Egypt, when he gives a speech on Egypt, this guy goes on television and in his coverage says it's a good speech. Imagine that.
All right, let's show some of it. Here's Fareed Zakaria on CNN.
It was his role as educator-in-chief that came out today. He provided a kind of worldview, almost a historical interpretation of the causes and consequences of the Arab Spring. He began in the beginning with Tunisia and moved forward, and he tried to present a way in which he saw America's interests and values as squarely aligned with this Arab revolution.
You know, so you advise people, that they take your advice, and then you tell everybody how wonderful your advice was.
Sean Hannity, whatever happened to that crazy notion called full disclosure? Yeah. Don't you think this reporter owed it to his audience to tell his audience, and full disclosure, the president called me for my advice on this very matter, which I just said he did such a great job on, and this is the advice I gave him? Here's an interesting thing. When the story broke last week, on last Wednesday, he was very proud of the fact that he'd given this advice. When people started talking about it over the weekend and the criticism came, suddenly he came out this week and he said at no time did he give the president advice on any specific policy. So why did Barack Obama then call him? You know, was he trying to dial American Idol and call the wrong number? I mean, of course, the only reason he called him was for his advice. So that's just disingenuous. Yeah. What the man should have done is A, recuse himself from the story, but secondly, if he was going to report on the story, clearly say, I advised the president on this policy.
Well, it'd be interesting to see what Howie Kurtz on unreliable liberal sources on his program, if he'll go after his own colleagues on this, or if he has. I don't know, because I don't watch his program. But
CNN really hurts. It really hurts its reputation. It can't consider itself a global leader in news when it is an active player in creating that very news it's covering.
You know, it wouldn't be bad if he said, these are opinions, but that's not how they portray themselves. All right, let me go to this. One of the things that's happening now, we saw this with David Gregory, because Newt Gingrich pointed out that, hey, food stamps distribution in this country, 1 in 7 Americans, a frightening figure, need food stamps right now. And millions of more have been added since Barack Obama's become president. That is a fact. And he refers to it as racially tinged. Now, this narrative just keeps picking up steam on NBC, one anchor after another. Let me give you one example. Let's roll this.
Now, as far as food stamps go, President Obama inherited, maybe point out, an economic mess from President Bush that has led to a record number of Americans needing help just to put food on the table. Gingrich, of course, is hell-bent on election. He just wants to cut these 44.2 million Americans who currently use food stamps to give tax breaks to old white millionaires. That's his priority. If Gingrich has his way on food stamps, you know who it's going to hurt? African Americans, women and children, and millions of low-income families. The Republican Party still can't win on issues, so their only chance is to play the race card again.
And so it even goes as far as to say, well, who was he talking about? White Americans, African Americans? You know, tell me, who is making this assumption about who gets food stamps?
Where do you start on this one? from start to finish, Ed Schultz is just lying through his teeth. What he's saying is that Republicans can't talk about Barack Obama's record. They're not allowed to, because you're a race baiter if you talk about that. And then they turn around and they invent out of whole cloth these things having to do with Republicans, and they call themselves truth tellers, or at least arbiters of truth. This is what your last two guests said, Sean, in your last segment. It was very instructive. People have to put on your seatbelts. This is going to be the ugliest, most mean-spirited personal campaign in the history of American politics, and I guarantee you the left, with the media at their side, are going to stop at absolutely nothing.
I
because
predict
they can't win. They can't
run on Obama's
guy.
record. That's their problem.
All they can do is make the Republican more disliked.
I predict that this race card that you now see NBC's using on a regular basis at other networks, I think is going to be at an all-time high. That's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong. Brent, good to see you. Thank you, buddy.